What's up, family? Welcome back to the channel where we break down the things that actually matter to Black people. Today, we're diving deep into something that's been central to Black resistance and empowerment for decades, and it's called Black Liberation Theology. You might have heard this term before, but exactly what does it mean? And why should it matter to you? Well, whether you're religious, spiritual, or you just care about Black liberation, this theology offers some real insight into our ongoing fight for justice. So let's get into it. Black liberation theology is a theological perspective that came about during the civil rights and Black power movements in the 1960s and 70s. The term was popularized by Dr. James Cone, a Black theologian who saw the disconnect between mainstream Christianity and the realities of Black people in America. Black liberation theology reinterprets Christianity through the lens of Black struggle. It asks, what does God have to say about the suffering of Black people? Instead of looking at religion as a tool to maintain the status quo, this theology views God as being actively involved in the liberation of the oppressed, specifically Black people. As Cone famously said, God is Black, meaning that God identifies with the oppressed and with Black people in their fight for freedom. For Cone and other theologians, if your understanding of God doesn't center on liberation and justice for Black people, then you're missing the entire point. Black liberation theology gives voice to our experiences and places them at the center of the faith. Now, to really grasp the impact of Black liberation theology, we've got to look at the preachers and churches that brought it to life, both historically and today. Let's start with Dr. James Cone himself. His book, Black Theology and Black Power in 1969, set the foundation for this movement. But Cone wasn't just a theologian in the academic sense. He was deeply influenced by the work of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Brother Malcolm X. While King leaned on Christian principles of justice and equality, Cone took it a step further, calling for a more radical, uncompromising theology that addressed Black suffering head on.
There can be no reconciliation with masters as long as they are masters. No reconciliation as long as men are in prison. There can be no communication between the masters and the slaves until masters no longer exist as masters, are no longer present as masters. The Christian task is to rebel against all masters, destroying their pretensions to authority and ridiculing the symbols of power. However, it must be remembered that oppressors never take kindly to those who question their authority. They do not like thugs and bums, people who disregard their power, and they will try to silence them any way they can. But if we believe that our humanity transcends them and is not dependent upon their goodwill, then we can fight against them, even though it may mean death. Thank you.
One of the key figures of Black liberation theology in terms of its practice was Reverend Albert Cleage, who later became known as Jaramogi Abibi Ajiman. His church, the Shrine of the Black Madonna in Detroit, is a perfect example of how Black liberation theology took shape in real life. Cleage emphasized Black self-determination, Black Jesus imagery, and the church as a center for political and social activism in the Black community.
We must deal with the problem that confronts Black people by building Black institutions, by understanding that only a separatist position is a viable position for Black people. Any organization or any leader in America who today advocates integration is a foe and an enemy of Black people and their survival in the coming years. White people have pretended for so long that Jesus was white and that they've had the necessity to interpret Jesus as being white when essentially white Christianity is racially, is historically false and theologically absurd and practically, in terms of its effect on Black people, it's a debasing institution that enslaves Black people.
And let's not forget Reverend Dr. Jeremiah Wright. Some of you might recognize that name because he was the longtime pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, a church known for its commitment to Black liberation theology. Wright's teachings, like Cone's, emphasize the idea that Jesus is concerned with the oppressed and that Black liberation is at the heart of Christianity. In fact, he famously preached Jesus was a poor Black man during a sermon that called out systemic racism in America. Wright's church played a huge role in advocating for social justice, economic empowerment, and liberation for Black people.
The British government used to rule from east to west. She colonized Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, and Hong Kong. Her navies ruled the 7 seas all the way down to the tip of Argentina in the Falklands. But the British government failed. The Russian government failed. The Japanese government failed. The German government failed. And the United States of America government, when it came to treating her citizens of Indian descent fairly, she failed. She put them on reservations. When it came to treating her citizens of Japanese descent fairly, she failed. She put them in internment prison camps. When it came to treating the citizens of African descent fairly, America failed. She put them in chains. The government put them on slave quarters, put them on auction blocks, put them in cotton fields, put them in inferior schools, put them in substandard housing, put them in scientific experiments, put them in the lowest paying jobs, put them outside the equal protection of the law, kept them out of their racist bastions of higher education, and locked them into positions of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America? No, no, no. Not God Bless America. God damn America that's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating her citizens as less than human. God damn America as long as she tries to act like she is God and she is supreme.
The church is silent about the racist policies of the United States government. The church is silent about a racist megalomaniac running for the presidency. A megalomaniac who's sweeping Republican primary after Republican primary because he is saying publicly what millions of white Republicans and 100 Black preachers are thinking, feeling, and been saying privately, not since 2008, but since the South lost the Civil War. And some would say since the Europeans stole this country from the real Native Americans, not the European immigrants who call themselves the folk who want to take our country back and make America great again. Yeah, great. The great land thieves, the great body stealers, the great slave traders, the great slave holders, the greatest hypocrites, the greatest liars, and the greatest racists on the face of the planet.
One of the most important aspects of Black liberation theology is how it directly challenges white supremacy. Historically, Christianity was often used to justify slavery, colonialism, and segregation. We've all seen how enslavers used the Bible to control our ancestors, using scriptures to demand obedience and submission. But Black liberation theology flips that narrative. Black liberation theology also empowers us to see our struggle for freedom as sacred and God-ordained. It pushes back against the idea that we should just, quote, turn the other cheek or wait for justice in the afterlife. The fight for freedom is now. And according to Black liberation theology, God is on the side of the oppressed. It challenges white supremacy, empowers Black people to reclaim Christianity for liberation, and reminds us that the fight for justice is spiritual as well as political. So whether you're in the church or on the front lines, Black liberation theology shows us that liberation is not just our right, it's our divine calling. Thanks for watching, fam. If this message resonated with you, drop a comment, hit that like button, and subscribe for more content that dives deep into our history, culture, and politics and our fight for liberation.